I do think we need to talk about the port debacle when it comes to Nintendo Switch, because this is one of like the most careless, the most ignorant, the most self-centered, the stupidest. One of the big things about the Nintendo Switch is this idea that somehow ports of old games on the hardware is bad. Oh, it's just fluffing up the lineup. These aren't really Switch games because they originally came out on the Wii U or the Wii, right? This isn't original content. I know we don't talk about the original content that comes out on Switch, but the ports existing somehow diminish those games entirely, right? I don't care if Donkey Kong Country Returns is the greatest platforming game ever made. I don't care about Another Code or like the Famicom Detective remakes or like or New Super Mario Bros. U. Like all of this is generic, stale, uninspired content. It's rehashed. It's used goods. It's sloppy seconds. Nintendo isn't producing good new games, so I don't respect them. Rah! Like that is the serious narrative that has been put forward about the Switch going into this console generation, is that Wii U ports are an issue, that they're a problem, that people don't like them. And when you actually look at how well these games actually do, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is like one of the best selling games of all time now. When you look at like New Super Mario Bros. U, when you look at like how well games like Donkey Kong Country Returns and Luigi's Mansion 2 are doing, like you realize that the people seething about these games are completely and utterly delusional, because these games clearly have an audience. These games clearly have people wanting to buy them. Clearly, a lot of people did not own them on the original platforms that they released on, whether it's because they weren't interested or because of their age or like for whatever reason, right? According to the YouTuber, releasing old games is problematic. This is a really good example of just how out of touch the gaming YouTuber actually is, because they don't understand that the vast majority of gamers don't own every single Nintendo console ever produced. They don't necessarily own Donkey Kong Country Returns. They don't necessarily own Luigi's Mansion 2. They don't necessarily own the hardware it was originally released on, right? Like the big cope when it comes to like Donkey Kong right now is that like, well, it also came out on 3DS. Yeah, in 2013. Do you know how many kids have been born since then? Do you know like how many kids are not growing up with 3DSs? Do you not know that like it's been long enough for a re-release? Like do you not understand like why Nintendo may want to do a re-release to get people like invested in one of their most iconic brands, right? Like this should be something that people get behind, because the more Donkey Kong fans there are, the more people that get into Donkey Kong Country Returns, the more people that get into Tropical Freeze, the more likely we will be able to see demand for a new game, right? This is how you expand your audience, right? You want to see these games do well, even if you're not interested in buying the games themselves. You should be supporting these ports and re-releases in the hopes that more people become interested in these brands and IPs, right? But the industry specifically does not see it that way. They try and make it out to be as if these games are lackluster, or that they're doing something wrong, or that they haven't aged well, or that they're priced incorrectly. All of this is like a gigantic coat to kind of distract you from the fact that games like Donkey Kong Country Returns are huge major milestones when it comes to 2D platforming. That was a game that proved that 2D platformers were still viable in 2010, right? It was a huge deal. Games like Luigi's Mansion 2, that brought Luigi's Mansion out of a hiatus, right? That game should be held in way higher regard than what it is. But now we have to do this thing where like, well, the original is better and 3 is better, so that makes 2 the bad one. Never mind that 2 is like legitimately a really good game, better than the original in a lot of ways. Like, never mind that like, you know, the developers of 2 went on to make 3, like never mind, how that game has never been re-released. Like we have to make this narrative that like this game is a mistake for some reason because like oh no, it's not anything new. It's cringy. It's embarrassing. It's just nothing but a gigantic cope to try and downplay really some of the best games Nintendo puts out lately is like a lot of these classic re-releases. These are the games that have stood the test of time that people loved, want to come back to and play again and want to experience. And yeah, the community is spitting in Nintendo's face for trying to reach a wider audience, for trying to introduce these classic games to new people. And yes, these are classic games. Okay. Like people have this mindset that like, oh no, like this game just came out. They don't need to re-release it. Like 15 years ago, 11 years ago, right? It wasn't last week, okay? It wasn't last year. This isn't like The Last of Us Part 2, re-releasing on the PS4, like PS5, like it's been longer than that. By the way, that's another good point is like where exactly are the people complaining about like all the PS5 re-releases? Because this seems to exclusively be a Nintendo phenomenon. The Nintendo audience are people complaining about like re-releases of like 10 to 15-year-old games. And then meanwhile, like Sony does that all the time, and like nobody bats an eye. Like that was the thing with Donkey Kong Country Returns. You can see the Metacritic score is that it's lower than it should be because like oh no, it's a re-release. And then The Last of Us Parts 2 gets like a 94 or whatever. It's like wait a minute, this is what we call a double standard, right? Like it's remarkable how people bend over backwards to protect like the golden goose of PlayStation, the sacred cow of PlayStation, I should say, and while like demeaning all these like far superior Nintendo games, like it's appalling. It always has been, but seeing this situation develop and seeing it get worse and worse every year to the point where like Arlo, people like Arlo are making videos like saying Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is like the saddest Nintendo re-release ever. It's just nothing but a cope. Every complaint I've seen about the game doesn't hold up. It's a perfectly good port. I played through it myself. This idea that like, well, it doesn't add enough content is completely and utterly false because, it has the 3DS content with better visuals, which in and of itself makes it the definitive version of the game, right? They didn't need to do anything more with it, is my honest opinion. And you're still seeing people like bend over backwards to cry about this. It's appalling, and we are going to have to start acknowledging that this is a very real issue. I do not want to see people complaining about ports of Nintendo games going forward. These games were good now, and they're good and they were good then. These are games that are going to find new fans with these re-releases, and that is something we should celebrate and look forward to. To new fans entering the community and start expressing their love and appreciation for these games. Like, we do not need to talk down about these games simply for being re-releases of old content.